Have you ever considered the sort of hidden forces maybe at play within powerful institutions? You know, the conflicts simmering just below the surface.
It's definitely something that captures the imagination.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that kind of thing, and this one's tailored for you, the listener, based on a specific piece of audio we analyzed.
That's right. It's from a show called Right Wing News, and it features their host, who goes by Voice of Reason, and some pretty striking claims they attribute to an ex-CIA agent.
Okay, so what's the core subject here?
We're looking into the source's claims about this ongoing, well, they call it a rift or conflict. It's between Donald Trump and what the source labels the deep state.
Deep state. That term gets used a lot here, meaning what? Entrenched officials? Intelligence community members?
Yeah, basically elements within the intelligence community as this source presents it. And they don't just call it a conflict, they film it as a silent coup trying to oust Trump.
A silent coup.
Yeah.
That's strong language. And the Voice of Reason host, how do they frame it?
They call it a serious constitutional crisis, something they feel isn't getting nearly enough attention in the wider media.
And they point to something specific to back this up.
They do. They cite a Fox News article specifically mentioning this ex-CIA agent who apparently broke his silence on the whole situation.
Got it. So just to be crystal clear for everyone listening, what's our approach today?
Our mission really is just to unpack the arguments and the specific claims made in the source material. We're laying out what they say.
Exactly. We're not here to agree or disagree, not taking sides. We just want to help you understand the perspective presented in this specific source.
So let's start with how they frame this silent coup.
Okay.
The Voice of Reason jumps right in, asserting that certain people in the intelligence community decided to assume the powers of the president for themselves.
By doing what, according to the source?
By, and this is a direct quote they use, leaking things they have no business leaking. That's presented as the main weapon, essentially.
Leaking, okay. And this action, they say, leads to
a constitutional crisis? The host really emphasizes that point.
And they seem almost validated.
Yeah, there's this sense of excitement in the source's tone. They say something like, the mainstream media is even acknowledging now what we've been trying to get out there.
That there is, in fact, a silent coup that's trying to take out Trump. And they point to that Fox News piece as proof.
Exactly. It's presented as, see, even they are reporting on it now. It's a way to try and lend legitimacy to their narrative.
Okay, so building on that, they bring in this ex-CIA agent from the article. What claims are attributed to him?
Well, the big one is that there's supposedly a criminal plot against Donald Trump. That's the phrasing used.
A criminal plot. Wow.
And the source uses this to say America has lurched from partisan warfare to the cliffs of an existential crisis. Pretty dramatic framing.
So what's the alleged motive behind this plot? Why leak or withhold information?
According to the source, it's because these intelligence people don't particularly like the way they perceive issues between Donald Trump and the Russian government. That's the reason given.
The Russia connection.
Okay.
Now, I remember the outline mentioning a specific quote used as justification.
Yes, this is a really interesting part. The source presents a quote supposedly from one intelligence officer saying, I know it's best for foreign policy and national security, and I'm going to act on that.
Sort of the ends justify the means argument.
It kind of seems that way, but then the source immediately pulls the rug out from under that quote.
How so?
They identify the person who said it as Aldrich Ames.
Aldrich Ames, the CIA traitor.
The very same. The source calls him a CIA traitor whose crimes of treason were responsible for the compromise of over 100 assets, adding that many were tortured and executed.
Oof. So using his quote to justify leaks is problematic, to say the least, in their view.
Extremely. The source calls it a dumb quote to pick. They slam it as reflecting a lawless liberal mentality that, quote, does not belong within the spy community.
So they tie it directly to ideology.
They do. It's presented not just as a bad choice of quote, but as evidence of a fundamentally flawed, dangerous mindset within parts of the intelligence community.
This brings up the whole argument about proper procedures, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The source argues, look, even if these officials did have legitimate concerns, viable information, they still don't get to take the law into their own hands.
There are rules.
Right. They say spies are absolutely taught how to handle situations in a very specific manner. If there's credible evidence, appropriate steps are taken.
And when the issue involves the president?
The source is very clear. The process is impeachment. They state That's how democracy works. That's how our Constitution works.
And they bring in Joe Biden.
Yeah, interestingly, they reference Uncle Joe Biden, or as they call him, Crazy Uncle Joe, apparently saying that an investigation into Trump's alleged Russia ties was ongoing and moving properly.
So the implication from the source
is that there was no excuse for these spies to have taken things into their own hands. The system was working, supposedly, so the leaks were illegitimate acts of rebellion.
Okay. So these officials, acting illegitimately in the source's view, what else does the source accuse them of?
Well, driven by misguided righteousness or partisan hatred, they've taken it upon themselves to be the judge, jury, and executioner.
How?
The source claims they prosecuted their case in the court of public opinion.
Meaning leaking to the media.
Exactly. And they name names. Shared their findings with like-minded individuals over at CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Compost.
Washington Compost. Okay, that's the source's term for the Post, obviously.
Right. And they paint these individuals as elected by nobody, responsible only to one another.
An unaccountable group.
That's the picture. Who've determined that Trump is guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors with no evidence to go for it. It's presented as a subversion of democracy.
And this leads to that slippery slope warning you mentioned earlier.
It does. The source asks you, the listener, to imagine a future scenario. Fast forward to 2020, they say.
Okay.
What if, hypothetically, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren had won against Trump and Pence?
Then what?
Then the source suggests maybe conservative spies would feel robbed and feel they had a righteous reason to act outside the rules.
So turnabout is fair play, but in a dangerous way.
Precisely. The source concludes this is a slippery slope that is not supposed to be happening in the United States of America.
The fear being
that we end up with the losing party deciding to burn down the country because they lost. A breakdown of peaceful transitions and acceptance of results.
It's a stark warning. Does the source offer any guiding principles, how things should work?
Yes. They lay out what they call 3 unbreakable rules for American spies. Kind of like a code.
Okay, what's rule number 1?
A sacred pledge of allegiance. And crucially, not just to the Constitution, but to the commander-in-chief.
The sitting president.
Yes. The source is incredibly blunt here. Quote, "You may not like the president. You don't have a goddamn choice, period."
No.
And it continues. "If you can't handle it, get the hell out. Resign. No gray area there."
Okay. Rule number 2.
The vow of secrecy. Specifically, the duty to keep classified information classified, not to leak it to the goddamn CNN and New York Times.
And the reason given.
Quote, "That's how people die." Linking leaks directly to endangering lives. Very serious charge.
And the third rule.
Maintaining a wall between government and the political process.
Staying out of politics.
Essentially, yes. They say this is codified in the Hatch Act, which limits political activities for federal employees, and it exists for this exact reason, to prevent the intelligence apparatus from becoming politicized.
Does the ex-CIA agent chime in on this?
According to the source, yes. He apparently adds a personal note saying he saw some people go rogue and they were punished accordingly during his career, reinforcing the idea that there are consequences for breaking these rules.
So, given this framework of rules being broken, what does the source demand?
Punishment. They state very strongly that these renegade spies, their term, need to be punished badly.
And they link this back to the transition of power.
They do. They say, one of the hallmarks of American system of government has been the peaceful transition of power. And then they add, until Barack Obama. That's a direct quote, laying blame.
Okay. And the punishments they suggest, I understand they're quite severe.
Yes. Extremely. The source says, with any luck and aggressive investigations, these renegade spies will soon join their fallen colleagues at the Allenwood Correctional Facility for the rest of their lives.
Life in prison.
Yes. But then the host, the voice of reason, adds a very personal and frankly inflammatory comment.
What is it?
Again, a direct quote. "I don't see why we can't just throw them in a pool, get them nice and wet, and then plug them into an electric chair. But that's me."
Wow. Okay. That's graphic. And definitely highlights the level of anger in the source.
Undeniably. It's quite shocking language.
So how does the source wrap up this whole segment? Is there a call to action?
There is. The host urges listeners to prepare, prepare, prepare. They talk about an ugly road ahead, a coming storm.
Politically, economically.
They say, if not politically, economically, no matter what, this is coming. So a general sense of impending crisis.
And is there a sponsor mentioned?
Yes. They promote a sponsor called TradeGenius.co,
What is that, supposedly?
described as a service using proprietary algorithms to send out buy or sell signals for stocks, equities, and binaries, which are a type of financial option.
And the host promotes it personally.
Claims their own account is doing extremely well and positions the service as a way for listeners to weather the storm they just warned about.
Interesting tie-in. Anything else?
Just a final plea for listeners to share the show, leave comments, subscribe, the usual podcast call to action, framing it as getting news the mainstream media is not going to give you.
Okay, so quite a journey through that source material. Let's just quickly recap the core narrative we've unpacked here.
Sure. We've essentially heard the source's perspective on what they call a silent coup.
Right, allegedly carried out by elements within the intelligence community against President Trump.
Driven by political disagreement involving leaks, and framed as a constitutional crisis with potentially dire consequences, like that slippery slope scenario.
And involving some very strong language and calls for severe punishment.
Definitely. Along with specific interpretations of the rules spies should follow.
So, again, just to reiterate for everyone listening, we've walked you through the specific claims and arguments presented in this particular source.
Our aim here at the Deep Dive isn't to validate or debunk these claims, but simply to present the viewpoint contained within the material we examine so you can understand it clearly. We're not taking a position on it ourselves.
Absolutely. And as you reflect on what you've heard from this source, maybe consider the broader implications.
Yeah, like what does it mean for public trust when narratives like this emerge? How does it affect our view of institutions or the control of information?
Then think about how vastly different perspectives on the same events, like constitutional processes or national security issues, can be prevented depending on the media source.
It really highlights the importance of engaging critically with information from multiple places, doesn't it? To try and form your own well-rounded understanding.
Definitely something to keep in mind.